You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
I'm an old person, but I'm still healthy according to everything that I know. But I could be contagious, because so could you.
Did not even... Do you know, that never even occurred to me.
That I might be an old person?
No, that
hiding out of my house?
That you were in the potential risk range.
I'm a high-risk person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So you're high risk for what?
I'm high risk for susceptibility to the coronavirus,
yeah, so
COVID-19.
We wanted to talk about that because people have lost their minds.
Well, the last statistic that I heard, a data point that I heard relevant to that, was that the average age of people who get infected with the coronavirus who require hospitalization is 67.
Right.
And the preponderance are the death in the 80-plus categories. They're up around 14%.
Right.
And 70-year-olds, which is what I am, 72, 72-year-olds are at roughly 6%.
So
fatality rate.
Are you gonna run to the store after this and buy toilet paper?
No, because toilet paper has nothing to do with the coronavirus.
Well, who's buying all the toilet paper?
Well, so I read some, psychologists are the smartest people in the world. And they write articles about all kinds of inane and banal things. So I read this article today by a psychologist that said it's a control issue. It's the illusion of control. If you can buy something that you have your hands on and you can say, this is relevant to my health. And Americans in general associate bowel issues and diarrhea issues with illnesses. Mm-hmm. And so even though they're being told this is not the issue with this particular illness, they're out buying toilet paper in part for those reasons, and then the preponderant part seems to be herd mentality. Everybody else is buying some, so I better get some.
And that's what I kind of think it is.
And the same reason, gun sales are skyrocketing in America.
Well,
I guess you can shoot your neighbor when he comes over to steal your toilet paper.
To me, it feels like it's the idea, we might all get quarantined, and so I want to make sure that I...
But even so, if you're quarantined for 2 weeks, most of us have 2 weeks worth of toilet paper in our homes. Most of the people I know do. Now, people that live in other circumstances may not. But they're not buying. Those people are not the ones that are buying cases and cases of toilet paper.
But that would then mean that people would have to be thinking rationally, and I don't think that in this situation that they are.
There's something that I've often said to you over the 35 years or 40 years I've known you. Man is not a rational animal. He is a rationalizing animal.
Right. So let's jump back for a minute and set the context. I called you. We are actually doing this outside of our regular recording. Yeah,
that's right.
So we usually record, for people who don't know, on Fridays. And today is a Monday, but I called you and said, hey, let's do something about coronavirus because I am hearing from my clients. They are beside themselves. I'm reading all of these articles in the paper. We have the president on TV at least once a week, if not every other day. We had a presidential debate that was held without an audience at my university. We have canceled the balance of the semester. We have to teach online. We can't have any in-person classes. I'm doing an independent study with a student who is graduating at the end of the semester, and I can't meet with that individual. It's against university policy.
You can FaceTime him.
Yes, I can do electronic, but I can't meet in person. And so there's a lot of stuff that's been going on. There's a lot of stuff in the news. And I said, we need to talk about this while it's a relevant issue. So we went ahead and said, let's record this today. That way I'll have time to be able to produce this and turn it around for the release on Friday. But so for right now, as of Monday, the 16th of March at 5 o'clock in the afternoon Central Time, we have roughly almost 4,000 cases of people who have been confirmed to contract the coronavirus in the United States, and somewhere between 68 and 70 deaths that have been confirmed. Is that
That corresponds to what I've heard.
Yeah. So that's where we're at, and obviously there are other parts of the world where this is exploded and is out of control in Italy and Spain,
France
Iran,
and Germany. They're all locked down.
China.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to get together and talk about it because for me, the question is this a legitimate, even if it's a pandemic, is it Black Plague, 50% of the human population? Actually, you're a history professor. What was the percentage of the human population that died during the Black Plague?
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know.
Okay. So I put you on the spot.
Yeah.
And I thought you would pull that out.
No, I can give you a number, but you wouldn't know if I was lying.
I wouldn't know. That's why I shot the puck at you.
I try not to do that. So
yeah.
I'll just say I don't know.
Okay. And that's a very honest answer. But I know it was at least 1/3 of the human population died during that period of time. This is not going to be anywhere near that.
It shouldn't be.
No. So at its worst, what they were saying was 3% of the population would be susceptible to fatality.
Know, Michael.
I know, but now it looks like that it's closer to 1%.
So you're doing what I think a lot of talking heads do. Not that you're a talking head, not casting any aspersions here. What I think we need to do is say to people, be calm, be reasonable, think about how to protect yourself, what we know about the way this is spread, what we know about what the effects of it are,
right?
And not get yourself wound up in a fever pitch trying to calculate how many angels can dance on the head of the pin.
Well, for me, the numbers actually make me feel more common-centered.
But I would question that. I mean, I appreciate that that's the reaction you're having, but since there's been so much dishonesty and lack of accurate information, those numbers don't mean anything. And nobody has a clue how many cases are out there or how badly it's spread through our country already.
Right.
What we're trying to do is come up with strategies for the only thing that we know how to do, which is to reduce our individual personal exposure and flatten out the curve of this, the peak of this virus.
So I agree that that's what we're trying to do. I don't know that I agree that is A, going to be effective, or B, the best strategy.
Well, the evidence that we have is that it is effective. It has been effective in countries that have authoritarian control over their population. They can say, you can't leave your house, and if you do, we'll arrest you. In those countries, the numbers of new cases have declined.
But the reason that I don't know if it will be effective is because
Americans follow
in Britain. Well, not only will Americans follow, but in Britain the philosophy is let's get as many people exposed as possible. That way we'll develop immunities, and there will be a herd immunity that will develop. And so even if coronavirus becomes a cyclical thing,
theory, right?
Yeah, and so even if we are able to, through social distancing, quell this particular outbreak, does that mean that we are any better off if this comes back in the fall or the summer of next year?
And we won't know till we get there.
And we won't know till we get there.
But what we can do is something today.
Yeah.
And the thing that we can do today is make a personal decision to reduce our exposure by not going into large public gatherings, not mixing with people that we don't know, washing our hands a dozen times more frequently than we normally do, sanitizing. I was talking to a doctor this morning. He said if you go to the grocery store, take 2 of those Clorox wipes and put them in one in each hand, put them on the bar of the basket, wipe that off, and then every time you take your hand off the basket to touch something to put in your basket to purchase, wipe your hands on it again. And then when you get home, wash your hands like crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, those are common sense little things that people may not be thinking about.
My wife and I went to Costco last weekend, and they were actually, and so this was before this became as hysterical as it is now, and at Costco, they were actually handing those out at the door.
Yeah.
So they were already proactively doing that.
Which goes back to what I said. Be calm, be rational, take reasonable precautions, don't panic, don't get in the herd rush, but do things that we know or believe give you a better chance.
So let's assume for the sake of argument that there's going to be some joker out there that's going to think, oh, I'm above this, I can do whatever I want, and they're going to just act however they want to.
Well, I read about two such jokers today on my news feed. One of them is a fundamentalist preacher at a church that said he wanted his people to crowd the pews and lick the floor to prove that their faith in Jesus would protect them from the virus. And the other one was a megachurch pastor at another fundamentalist church who said, we will crowd these pews as proof to Jesus that we love Jesus, and if we die for Christ. So if people are thinking that way, then they can make those choices. But if they're not thinking that way, they should make different choices.
Well, I guess my issue is this, that I actually have a predilection to believe more in the UK mentality of how to handle this than in the United States mentality. That being said, I'm going to comply with whatever the restrictions are in the United States.
Because you're a law-abiding citizen.
Well, and because I think it's the right thing to do. I even if I disagree, I'm going to comply both for myself, for my community, and for other people at large. I want to set that example for other people because I think that's the right thing to do.
Well, I think that's good.
But I'm talking to a lot of people who are beside themselves. We know that the stores are sold out of bread. And why do people make French toast in a crisis?
Well, they probably don't realize that France is locked down, and they think maybe the French will come over
but
and have breakfast.
whenever you have a crisis or it snows or whatever, people go to the store and they buy milk, eggs, and bread.
Yeah.
And all I know you can make with that is French toast.
Oh, there's so many more things. You live a sheltered life, young man. No, I think, again, it's a herd mentality. It's a kind of panic thinking that people do, even to the things that they buy. When they hear there's a run on the banks, they'll go to the store and buy milk, bread, and eggs because the world's going to come to an end. We better get what we can have. Right.
So that's really the crux of what I want to talk about is what is the psychology of all this. Now, we're going to put up a couple of articles that have to do with the medical side and that have all the geeky numbers that I would love to talk about.
But I won't let you. But you'll just put them up there for people like you to read.
That's right.
All right.
Because I understand
Which I won't read, by the way.
They don't help anybody.
I
get that.
Yeah.
Or don't help many people because there aren't a lot of people like me. But what I really want to talk about is this idea of the hysteria that is associated with this, because I believe that it should be possible for us as adults to be able to face a crisis without having a hysterical reaction. Do you agree that we should be able to do that?
One would hope that we should be able to. Yeah.
And so how do we do that?
But it doesn't help us to do that if we have hawkers out in the community shouting at the top of their lungs, the sky's falling, the sky is falling. It reminds me of the musical, the Music Man. When there's an elision of a couple of words that they use. They call it mass hysteria, meaning mass hysteria, but they slide those words together when they're talking about the Music Man and selling the bands and all that stuff. I am concerned because of the preponderance, especially in what is statistically the most vulnerable population, those people 70 and 80 and over, who watch Fox News. At least a third of the American population watches that channel exclusively. And Fox News, until the last 2 or 3 days, has been aggressively poo-pooing this whole coronavirus concern, saying it's a Democratic Party scam, it's a hoax, they're trying to destroy President Trump, don't pay any attention to it. And I think they've just done a disservice to their clientele by encouraging vulnerable people to take risks that they shouldn't take.
Well, I think they backed off of that
in the last 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
But not until then.
Well, exactly. And what I would say is that even if they have backed off of that now, the damage is still done.
I went to my wife and I went to the grocery store in the middle of last week to buy 2 weeks supply of non-perishable groceries to take to her mother, who's 82 years old. We took them over to her house, and she was watching Fox News. And she said, well, it's a hoax. There's nothing going on.
Right.
And I said, well, okay, but if you die, then I'll take all these groceries back because they're not perishable.
Well, and my concern is...
My wife wasn't happy that I said that to her mother.
No, I'm sure she was not, because your wife's a right-thinking person.
She's a good person. I'm not. I make no claims to that.
No dispersions about being a good person.
Yeah.
My concern is this, that at this point now, I find safety in the numbers. I want to do the research. I want to know. I want to try and. So here's my thing. I want to try and find the truth for myself. I would encourage anybody who is in that same category as me to do their research, but do real research. So I read peer-reviewed journals. I read research from reputable resources. I don't just listen to a particular person or a particular news outlet, because I think the media is driven by their need to be sensational.
Yeah.
Because that's what gets.
I agree. And the more liberal left networks do a similar thing in the other direction. Mm-hmm. So you have to find a midpoint. You have to find a place to stand.
And so now we
stop and think, be reasonable, take precautions that make sense.
So the messages are conflicting, which creates cognitive dissonance that we then experience as anxiety. It's actually fueling the flames of the hysteria, the conflicting messages
absolutely.
That exist. And so people need to pick a side. If you want to believe it's a hoax...
No, don't pick a side. Just calm down.
Well...
That's what I'm saying.
Which is
why we need leadership.
But you still have to pick a side to calm down.
At this moment in time, probably, my prayer is that we will have cogent, coherent leadership at the national and state and local levels that say, these are the things that we know. Mm-hmm. This is the risk that you have. What we know about this is that you can minimize this risk if you do these things. Mm-hmm. Please do these things. And that seems to be happening finally. 3 weeks into this.
And what I would say to people who say, well, but I'm 35 and you know what?
Oh, you're going to kill grandma. You may not get it, or you may not get it to a deadly point. Although I did read that the coach of one of the national soccer teams in Spain, 21-year-old coach, died today from it.
And had no other health risks?
That's what they said.
Well, that's
so it does happen.
Yeah. So
it is rare.
Yeah, it's rare, but it happens.
But the main risk, I saw pictures today in the media of kids, teenage kids, spring break kids, college kids at Disney World in the thousands yesterday. Mm-hmm. And what they're not realizing is if they get infected with the virus and they come home, their parents or grandparents may die.
Right.
Because they made this decision.
But even if you don't feel that moral obligation to say, I could infect an elder person that could be at risk, then just adopt what I'm saying is my guiding principle, which is I'm going to do this because it is the right thing to do. I want everybody to calm down. I'm going to comply with what the dictates are. If they tell me hunker in place, then I'm going to do that. I'm going to do what the people who are in authority are saying to do, and I'm going to set that example, and I'm going to say to everybody, we can all do that, and we can all be calm when we're doing it.
Absolutely. And respectful of one another, which is not an insignificant point either.
That's right. Absolutely not. You know, I had a young guy who contacted me today and said, hey, you know what, I want to do, and actually, he's not the only one. He's the one I'm thinking of right now. But, and said, I want to do Skype sessions for a couple of weeks. And I said, hey, no problem.
We can do that, yeah.
I don't think that he's at risk, and I don't think that he necessarily even thinks that he's at risk. But if that makes him feel good, then absolutely, we can do that. We can do lots of things in an adaptable way that makes everybody feel comfortable if we are willing to step back and stop being a part of the mass hysteria. We don't all need to run to the grocery store and buy toilet paper.
Absolutely. But there's another thing I want to talk about today before we run out of time. Yeah. I want to talk about these families that have young children. And because every time there's a major crisis, the media goes nuts, and you get all these doom and gloom forecasts and people shouting and carrying on, and people get all psyched up and agitated. They don't always remember to talk to their children about it.
No.
And you need to sit your children down and say, what's going on? Because children in a vacuum get really anxiety-ridden.
Preach. No, that means I agree with you.
You want me to continue? Yeah. I assume that's what you meant. So I'm concerned about that, and I think that what parents should do, two things that I want to mention. One is if you should be in a family that becomes quarantine. If somebody in the house, the president said today, if somebody in the house gets infected with it, everybody that lives in the house should stay home for 2 weeks. They should isolate that person within the house, but they should stay home for 2 weeks. So I was thinking, what do people do, especially if they have young children or school-age children, all day and all night for 14 days in the house? And you need to give some thought to that and not just react. Don't just turn on the TV, but think of things. Teach them to cook breakfast. Teach them to do a load of laundry. Teach them to shine their shoes. Think of things that are not school-based activities and lessons that they can learn. Play cards with them. Draw or color with them. Read the cartoons in the paper. I remember Fiorello LaGuardia became famous in New York City during the newspaper strike because he read the comics over the radio to the little boys and girls. There are things that you can do if you think about it.
And the reason why that's so powerful is after 9/11, we dealt with the trauma that the kids experienced, and it went kind of unnoticed because all of us adults were also experiencing trauma, and it was months or even years later that we realized how traumatized those kids were. And that was something we couldn't see coming. This we can see coming. And if we let this be a traumatic experience for even one child in this country, that's on us.
Well, but the other thing that I wanted to mention is, again, be calm, be reasonable, and have an answer that kids will accept. Kids will accept answers that are delivered in calm, rational tones. And so when they ask an unanswerable question, Daddy, why did Grandma die? And am I going to die? Are you going to die? You can sit down and do the whole litany of the Bible and whatever you believe and all that. It depends on the age of your child, what they're able to hear. So what you need to do is be calm and reassure them. We are doing everything we can do to make ourselves safe. These are the things that we're doing. This is about us learning how to do these things, and we're convinced we'll get through this. And don't give them a philosophical, well, you never know. You walk out in the street today, get run over by a bus. Don't say that to a child. Say to a child, we are doing the things that we know, that work, that help people be healthy. We're trying to live a healthy life. We're calm. There's no reason to panic. There's no reason to be anxious or lose sleep. We'll continue to do things that we do in our home. We'll play cards. We'll read a book. We'll read out loud chapters to each other. We'll take baths. We'll do what we do every day, and this will pass.
And that all starts from the adult being calm in the first place. And that's what I think we have to reinforce is it's time for everybody to take a step back, do a couple of deep breaths, and ask yourself, what is there really to be hysterical about?
Well, and hysteria may not be the only thing. If you take 6 adults who live in a trailer, a 2-bedroom trailer, and they're quarantined in that trailer for 2 weeks, over the course of that 2 weeks, somebody's going to get ticked off with somebody else.
That's right.
So what I would suggest is before that point is reached, sit down and talk about how do we give timeouts, how do we take breaks, how do we calm ourselves down. Because when I get bored with you or I get mad at you about something, I don't want to escalate it into a fist fight.
But I would argue, though, that the people who are quarantined are the lucky ones. Because the stuff that we were reading about hysteria said that it is the emotionality of the group, but more importantly, it is the behavior of the group. So groupthink operates more primarily off of behavioral imitation than it does emotional imitation. And so when you're quarantined, you don't see everybody going to the store and raiding the aisles and everything. So it should be easier for that person to be able to resist the tendency to get wrapped up in that. The rest of us have to...
If there aren't raw emotions in the household. But if there are...
Right.
Then how do we moderate those? How do we help people calm down? Because you're going to get cabin fever if you're locked in the house and you're worried about how's Grandma doing. I told Phyllis's mom one of our concerns because of, the high-risk population that she's in. If she gets really sick, we can't come and see her because we're in high-risk populations. We can come and drop off food. We can make sure that she has something to eat or get medicines for her, but we can't come in and wipe her fevered brow. So she's going to have to handle some of this too. And then what the professionals are saying is if you get a high fever and a respiratory problem, then and you can't breathe, then you call your doctor, you call the emergency room, they send somebody to come and get you, and you hope that the hospital that you are taken to has ventilators available.
And nowadays, if you're in a high-risk population, that's absolutely what you should do. What they're concerned about is the healthcare system getting overrun, which is what happened in Italy. But if you are able, now they have drive-through testing centers.
As of 3 days ago.
Yeah, yes. and so you can call your doctor, and allegedly we're
make
hoping
an appointment and drive through.
That this is test. That the supply chain of that is going.
No, I'm talking about at the other end of that continuum when you have those respiratory symptoms, because it is a respiratory problem that kills people.
Right,
it's an aggressive type of pneumonia. And if you can't breathe, and it's more likely to be that condition if you have other compounding health factors. If you have a heart attack history, high blood pressure, diabetes,
any of those things.
All of those things contribute to the increased risk factor that you're under.
Had an organ transplant?
Yeah, anything like that.
Right, all of those things that because nowadays, people who have undergone chemotherapy and may be in remission or have had an organ transplant, these people look very, very healthy,
right,
but their immune systems are still damaged and repressed, and they're at great risk. It's even called now SARS.
Yeah.
Severe acute respiratory syndrome.
Exactly.
So it is a form of SARS that happened that we saw back in the early 2000s. And the question is, are these things going to become cyclical, and is it going to be the new norm? And it very well may be, but even if that is the case, that's why we have to remain calm.
Dr. Maupin, the doctor that I work with in my day job, is recommending a peptide called Thymosin alpha 1, which
can you send me that information and I'll put it up on the show notes?
Yeah.
Okay.
It helps rebuild your immune system. So if your immune system is compromised, Thymosin alpha 1 is believed to help, and it's used for treatments of cancer and viruses primarily. So she's saying, if you are in a high-risk population, you may want to consider getting Thymosin alpha 1 from doctors that have it available.
And we will put that information in the show notes so people don't have to hear that, us say it and then remember that. I'll actually put a link for that in the show notes. Okay. So let's land the plane by trying to give people some concrete answers for how to remain calm in this kind of a chaotic situation.
Minimize your exposure to hysterical people. There is an emotional contagion that you can experience, the mob psychology kind of thing. Stop and think, what would a reasonable person do in this situation? I mean, realistically, am I going to come into your house and try to steal some toilet paper because there's none at the store? Do I get myself all amped up because there's no toilet paper at the store?
That's right.
Calm down, think about it. Try to get yourself prepared to spend 10 to 14 days in your home. Make sure that you have supplies, food, non-perishable items, so that you don't accelerate your anxieties. Try to keep your social distance from other people, especially from people that are vulnerable, older people. Stay away from people in crowds. Don't go out in large crowds. Don't go out to eat dinner in a restaurant. At this point, I would say not to. I mean, some people are still advising that you do.
Well, the restaurants are all closed now, so.
Well, they're working on it.
Yeah.
Depending on the state, depending on the location. And a lot of the restaurants that are closing are trying to say, well, we'll fix food for pickup. Come back and get it.
Okay, so that's an interesting question, and I don't mean to run us long. We're already running long, but I thought about that too. They said that if you have a pickup already in your store, or if you have a drive-through, that you could still operate that way. And I'm wondering, when you're talking about, or even delivery, like getting a pizza delivered, is that safe?
Yeah, because the way they do it is you give a credit card number when you make the order. They've already got their money. They drop it off on your porch. They don't come to your house. They don't talk to you. They may ring, like Amazon does when it delivers. They set it on the porch, they ring the doorbell, they go away.
So the only possible way that you're at risk is if the person who actually cooks the
coughs
food
in the middle of your food.
Well, or just has an infection themselves. Okay.
But that's always a risk when you go out to eat.
I was just going to say, but you know what? That's
Why
no
is that
more
any
than
different than-
just because the hype. I mean, I'm even susceptible to it. Like I hear this thing about, get food delivered, and I'm like, well, how can you do that? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But no, that makes absolute sense. So we have to take time to think things through. Our initial reactions in this situation may not be the right ones.
If you use something like Uber Eats, you order it, you've already paid for it and tipped the driver on your credit card. Then they pick up the food from the restaurant and bring it to your house and drop it off. You don't have to interact with them.
And so our message, I think, is we want people to be calm. We want people to think of their elders, but also the children.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of stuff going on. Even though kids appear to be immune to the virus,
and
there's a lot of stuff that's going on.
In closed environments together for 2 weeks at a time without a break. I mean, that's not always a vacation.
And think that you have the ability to choose the examples that you want to see. Right. You can watch the herd and watch the mass hysteria crowd, or you can choose to pay attention to people who are moving through this in a calm nature. There are people who are moving through this crisis in a calm nature. They're quieter and less visible, but they're there. Choose the example that you want to follow.
Right.
All right, so hopefully this has been beneficial for people. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. I will have my information also on the site. If anybody would like to contact us, if you feel like you're in crisis and just need to talk, we can either do that or we can refer you to a place where you could actually get some help. So hopefully everybody is going to be safe. Be calm, pay attention to your elders, pay attention to your children, pay attention to your ability to remain in a confined space and be able to do that with grace and dignity. And as always, go ahead.
Just like Queen Elizabeth said in World War II, be calm and carry on.
There you go. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.